become a series of short talks. So 4 or 5 people, maybe 10-15 minutes per person, talking about portable operations and basically that kind of broader topic. So things that you might enjoy doing, tips and tricks you might have learned from doing things out in the field, away from your workshop or your vehicle, lessons that new members might want to pick up. We've got a few F calls that come through this year, talking about doing things out in the real world. I'm sure there's plenty of lessons people have learnt the hard way, which would help people get into doing more fun things in the outside world without making expensive mistakes or having to go back to the truck to find out, where I left that spare antenna, or I've got to drop a screw somewhere, all those kind of little things. So if I'll be sending a email out to all members probably later on tonight or tomorrow to seek a broader input, but if anybody here's got some thoughts regarding what they could possibly do to, again, 10-15 minutes tops, talk, even shorter, just to get people into doing radio out in the real world. The idea being people talk about it, we do a panel session at the end and try to get some people doing things outside in the fresh air and the nice weather we're now walking into, rather than, I guess, being stuck in at work or stuck in the shack indoors and going, would it be nice to be out in the sun?
So the talks are going to be in here,
yeah.
But are you trying to set things up outside, eh?
About doing port operations. So, I mean, I know, Brix, you're a long-term expeditioner, and I'm sure you've got plenty of lessons learned about how to organise to get out in the field.
Well, I'm happy to do 10 or 15 minutes on
yep.
portable EME. I will be just back from New Zealand, but I might be able to talk about success or failure.
Modesty, Rex. It's success. Come on, we all know, Rex. But again, the SOTA fans here, I mean, it's an area of the hobby some people find interesting, in getting out in the real world away from the office and doing things out there with radios. I noticed from the list of ads on the board behind here, someone's looking at selling a squid pole. For those who do things in the outside world, you know what that's about. Those that you don't, you might want to find out. So again, email we're going out just to get people thinking about doing a bit different in terms of presentation, more people involved, and hopefully sharing some of those, or sharing those really good lessons we learnt the hard way. Nothing as worse as getting out there and realising you should have brought something else along with you. Anyway, moving on. Looking around the room, I did a quick head count. I think I saw 5 DMR handhelds here. Is that correct? Not including this lovely collection of devices here. I think it's pretty good, pretty safe to say that one of the things the committee's done, and thanks largely to the hard work of our friend Clayton, Vice President, is the club buys into the GD77s. I'm pretty sure we can say quite safely the taking of digital radios has been a very big surprise to a lot of people. I think it's a whole new aspect of the hobby. It's opened up very, very quickly. As I'm sure you've all noticed, we've got the DR1 up and running here thanks to the hard work of our repeater operator Damien Stiles. That's now doing stuff, and we're doing more bits and pieces out there when we get into the MMDVM upgrade on that. So digital is well and truly here in Hobart, and I think it's only going to get bigger and better as we get more radios out in the hands of operators. It's an area where I know many people have questions, have a lot of fun. How do I make my radio do, with lots of questions out there in an area where there's no book to read if you actually read the manuals. I mean, who here reads the manuals? It's a hobby that's starting up again in real interest. I think there's a lot of interesting things to learn here.
That's for sure.
I can pretty much say, from looking at the collection of devices here that Scott has on show, he's been doing it for a bit.
Hello.
Your PayPal account must be murder. So anyway, I'd like to hand over to our long-term member, Scott Evans, VK7HSE, digital radio. Thank you, Scott.
Well, I don't need to introduce myself because that's been done, but anyway. So the main purpose of tonight is to try and explain a bit of what digital radio actually is, in particular focusing more on DMR and the GD77s that have been the bulk purchase just recently. I was thinking more along the lines of like a more practical side of things, so showing how to use the 2 different systems that are available. And then I've just got a couple of other radios here just to show that there are other modes as well. And we don't have anything that can actively use those 2 because they're UHF and there isn't a UHF system up yet. That's what that's for. So, I suppose really the first thing is to introduce what DMR radio was actually invented for, and it come back to the European. Do you want a sheet in front of you? European Telecommunication Standards Institute, or ETSI. They were trying to find a way to make better use of radio spectrum. So instead of being a standard FM signal, 16 kilohertz wide, and you can only have one client on that particular given frequency, with conventional analog radio, and they kind of thought, well, there's got to be a way to do it. So they went down the path of data, and they've achieved, this was back in 2005, they achieved to get a 6.5 kilohertz signal running at 9600 baud packet speed, with a voice clarity that to equivalent of FM analog, to a degree. Depends on the gear that you're listening through. Some of it is not real good, some's great. So it's essentially bandwidth economy, so that, for example, a DMR stream uses TDMA as its thing, so it's a pulsed thing, and in the case of Tier 1 DMR, which is just simplex to simplex radio, the actual pulse is not as critical. Tier 2 becomes rather critical because that is where you're actually talking through a repeater, and Tier 3 is trunk networks, which is getting well beyond the scope of what we're going to cover here. So that's a very, very brief rundown of how DMR came about. It was purely just to make better use of the frequency, get more clients on the air, so to speak, making money, of course, selling that spectrum. So as I mentioned about the actual mode, it is a TDMA mode, and also, as I said, 9600 baud speed. However, its throughput speed is more equivalent to that of 4800 baud. Because you have the two streams, you've got obviously 48 per side. So that's that. Now the other lingo that comes with DMR is you have a thing. There's three layers basically within DMR. You have what's called an all call. In other words, it would call all radios within a specific group. You have a group call, which calls a certain amount of radios within a group, and then you have a private call, which is just a radio to radio. Now, primarily what you use within amateur is just the group call and private call. Group call is what you use when you're accessing the repeater, and a private call is what you use to actually control the use of reflectors, should you wish to go down that path of playing around with reflectors. While we touch on that, there are two main networks set up for DMR for amateur. One is called, well, it used to be formerly known as DMR Mark, which is, I forget what that stands for now. But, yeah, Motorola is clearly in the name there.
Yeah, Motorola Amateur Radio.
That's it. Yeah. So that is one network, and that is based off reflectors primarily. So when you're using that system, there are certain talk groups to cover local stuff, but then for international it's all dealt with by reflectors. Then the other network, which is very different from the DMR Mark network, is the Brandmeister network, and that one still has reflectors, but they allow open use of all talk groups basically. So whereas the Mark system is more locked down, that you've only got a set number of talk groups that you can use, as well as the reflectors, whereas Brandmeister is literally open slather. As long as you're not interfering and hurting anybody, it's anything goes. Which just kind of raises the point there. I mentioned the word talk group. Now, that is like a unique ID. So, for example, I suppose in reflector terms, it's like it's a room. In internet chat, the same again, it's like a room. You have certain, in the case of the amateur setup, they've used the same international codes for each country. So for example, Australia starts with 505, New Zealand is 530, so that's with the Brandmeister network. So if you're using Brandmeister and you're wanting to, say for example, talk to, I don't know, let's say a station in VK1, you can simply dial up on talk group 5051, and that is locked into the ACT's dedicated talk group. Likewise for VK7 is 5057. On the Mark system, they have a similar setup, except it's in the 3000 range. It's 3807 for Tasmania, and all the states, so 1 through to 9 is dedicated for the states. And same with Brandmeister network, it's 505 and then the state number. And that's worldwide for the wow. Sorry. French horns, I thought, wow. Pretty special. That's put me off. The other thing too with DMR too, to uniquely identify a radio so that while you're using it with your voice, you obviously will still identify using your voice. However, the radio is set with a specific number that you get identified when you issued when you apply for it, and that becomes your unique number. I'm a bit greedy and I have 3 of them, but that's I went down that path thinking I needed 3, but it turns out I didn't. I really only needed 1. The reason why I got 3 was because I was running multiple hotspots and I needed to keep them separate, but then I found out a trick, and I'll explain that a little bit later. And I only found that out fairly recently. That is the most briefest overview that I can probably give of DMR.
Can I ask a question at this point?
Certainly, yeah.
Do the Mark and Brandmeister networks work together?
No, they don't. They're independent.
So if you have a Mark radio, you can't talk to a Brandmeister station?
There is not a radio designated. It comes down to the way you program the radio.
So you can't work on both?
Yes, you can work on both systems on the same radio. You can't cross-talk from one system to the other though. So, for example, on this one here, I actually have it programmed at the moment. Turn it on. I know the screen is not going to be visible to everybody, but with the GD77, you're aware that they're a dual band radio, and there's 2 lines of numbers, which is basically, in my case, I've got it set up so that I'm using a VHF one on the top and a UHF one on the bottom. In this case, it's Clayton's repeaters, the VHF one, which is on Brandmeister, and the UHF one, backlight's going to keep going off, so I'll just hope it stays on. Backlight, always on. Okay, that'll solve that problem. Yeah, so at the moment there is a VHF frequency and a UHF frequency. As I said, the VHF one is on the Brandmeister network, and the UHF one is on the DMR Mark network. The way I've got the radio set up at the moment, the GD77 has 3 ways that you can use it to receive, and they call it a bit it's a bit ambiguous the way they call it. What they call it double weight, single weight, and off. And eventually what it means is double weight is essentially dual band, so two bands are active at the one time, but you can only receive and talk on one at a time. So if you were talking on the top one, if there was any traffic on that bottom one, you wouldn't hear it because it's busy doing the other. It can only receive one lot of voice traffic at a time. The next mode is single weight, and what it is, it still appears the same as what they call dual weight, but it depends on which band you're on by pressing the which arrow does it? Yeah, the side arrow here. Depending on which that is on the side of, determines which band you're actually listening to. That's the other thing too. When it's in dual weight mode, you cannot use the scan function on these radios. They will not scan whilst it's in dual mode, because it is essentially already scanning, because it's doing like a switch between the 2 frequencies continuously. When it's in single mode, you can use the scan function. Again, that comes to how you program the radio. I'm not 100% how Clayton's done the code plug that he's done. I do have a copy of it, but I haven't actually looked at it. The new one that he gave me the other day. And when it's in off mode, it's just in single band mode, and you get 2 lines of text for the relevant thing. Now, as I say, I know the screen you won't be able to read it, but it's Brandmeister, and 505 is the talk group number of 505. Now, where there is a little bit of similarities between Brandmeister and Mark is a couple of the talk groups they share, like 505 for example, is the Australian, you call it pretty much like the national calling frequency. On the Mark system, they kind of, when I say they, it's the people who run it, basically say, look, make your contact on 505 and move to a state-based talk group once you've made your initial contact. On Brandmeister, that's not really so. It's basically, people will have a good old rag chew on 505 Brandmeister if they so desire. It's not seen in the same way. I think the reason for that is because with Brandmeister it's more used by people with hotspots than it is with physical repeaters, whereas the Mark system is the opposite. That was traditionally RF only up until the beginning of this year, was it? March or so this year was when they finally set up a server to be able to accept hotspot connections into the Mark system. Hotspots, again, that's a whole different, we're not going there tonight. Now what am I thinking of? So,
Scott,
yeah.
In terms of these different modes, where does D-Star fit into all this?
Rightio, D-Star was actually, when did ICOM come out with that? It was about 2002, I think.
Yeah.
So D-Star, I've actually got an ID51 there, which is a D-Star radio. Yeah, that came out in 2002, and that was organised by the JRRL, wasn't it, I think, and ICOM. And it's kind of, it was a proprietary mode, specific for amateur use only, and that got quite a few people offside. It was this proprietary mode, it's going to close source, it's not going to be freely usable for everyone, and to a point that kind of came true. For a long time you could only buy D-Star within ICOM radios. It's only just been recently that Ken would have come out with, I forget the model now, I think it's a DR74 I think it is, that's got D-Star as well as FM and APRS, that kind of stuff. So D-Star was before DMR by about 3 years. D-Star again was primarily amateur use, whereas DMR was primarily commercial. This is not an amateur setup at all. That's why when it comes to programming the radios, it's a bit of a nightmare because there's certain terminologies that each manufacturer, being whether it be Radio Oddity, TYT, these are the cheap Chinese ones, even if you go to Motorola, Tate, Kenwood or ICOM, they've all got their own lingo for what they call things. So there are some common grounds, but generally it's a little bit different with each brand. But yeah, how you program the radio for amateur use would be very different to how you would do it for commercial use. Commercial use, you pretty much, it would pretty much all be tier 2, which is, I think I mentioned that earlier. Tier 1 is just simplex to simplex. Primarily tier 1 DMR is actually for the, I don't think it's actually a CB band, but it's the 446.
Do you perceive these two modes that you're talking about will overtake D-Star and that will disappear?
Well, the popularity of DMR probably has surpassed D-Star. D-Star's got a bit stale because it's like,
so would it be reasonable to say that superseded by several orders of magnitude at this point already?
probably, yeah. The uptake of DMR in the last 2 years has really exploded.
I'm glad we didn't spend the effort of getting into it.
Is there a D-Star repeater or
Yes.
service in Hobart?
Yeah, Clayton actually has one. He actually has, he's actually got two, but he's only got one on air. He actually has the proper one that ICOM were issuing out back in 2004 or 5 or whatever. That is still sitting at his place because there was some kind of agreement where wherever those repeaters were located, that's where they had to stay. If you wanted to move them, you had to write to ICOM and say, well, hang on, we need to move this, because they wanted to know exactly where their assets were. Even though it was the clubs or whatever, you know, individuals' radio, ICOM still wanted to basically have control over the radio itself. That's about as much as I know on that. It's not a field. So I only got into D-Star this year. So I'm a very late comer to D-Star. But you see that the way the digital protocols, not the protocols, the modes work, they're very similar to D-Star. As I say, it's just the terminology is a little bit different. But again, D-Star was an amateur, originally conceived as an amateur protocol for amateurs to use, whereas the DMR, P25 and XDN were purely commercial. Like for example, all your emergency services in the States all use P25 across the board. And in Europe, NXDN is more popular. The voice clarity of both those, when I'm looking at these two radios, because that's what they are, that's NXDN and that one's P25, the reproduced audio out of those two is the best audio that you'll get out of digital radio at the moment. They both, they are not TDMA, they are constant carrier. Essentially they are both C4FM, but the way they deal with the handling is different. NXDN is kind of compared to DMR, but without the TDMA, because it uses frequency, was it FDMA? Yeah, frequency division instead of time division. I'm already confused myself on that. It's different. And P25 is similar again, where it does it with the phase as opposed to time, I think. Good question. You put me off there, but that's good.
So with the C4FM or whatever.
Right, yeah, well, that's what I was just about to come into. C4FM is, well, it started off as a commercial protocol, which I said P25 is basically C4FM with a few differences. Yaesu adopted C4FM as their digital mode because ICOM had D-Star. I forget when Yaesu came out with Fusion, what they call Fusion, which is C4FM. I'm guessing, if I was to say, it'd be late, between 2005 2010, somewhere in that time period. It never really took off except in Japan because people either went to the expense of buying ICOM D-Star or you had to decide which camp you were going to go with because the two aren't compatible. You can't use a C4FM radio on D-Star. Likewise, can't use the D-Star radio on C4FM. They won't talk to each other. So Yaesu went down the C4FM route. They've used in a particular, there's two modes of C4FM. Technically four, but there's two. What they class as wide mode and narrow mode. Wide mode is a single channel using 12.5 kilohertz channel spacing at, I can't remember if it's 9600 baud or 4800. I think it's 48. Anyway, that's using the full bandwidth of that available channel space, and the narrow is using 6.5 kilohertz. To my ear, and granted my hearing is probably not that good, and through a little 1 inch speaker there, they sound the same to me, but I'm sure if you got them on a fairly decent speaker you would hear a fairly distinct difference. D-Star for me sounds a bit thin, because that's 6.5 kilohertz, that's 9600 baud as well, I think. Should have researched that, shouldn't I? But anyway, DMR is 9600 baud, theoretical anyway. So, what else are getting to? Covered talk groups, covered that. Yeah, is there any other questions before I try and think of something else I'm going to say? I've stalled.
Your observations regarding the audio quality between the different handsets and modes, do you think it's simply the manufacturing of the analog parts of the radios and more expensive radios with better audio sound better, or is it possibly the way they're encoding the voice?
It's the way it's encoded. The quality of components of the radio certainly would play a part, but if you broke it down to a nitty-gritty of what is what, the protocol is what determines what sounds better. But what sounds better to one sounds different to another. You know, as I say, I prefer P25 NXDN for recovered audio. You know, it is literally like how we are talking now to my ear. But when you get into, say, D-Star and then even DMR, it's a little bit thinner, a little bit, you know, it's not as... sometimes, this comes down to how well a DMR repeater is set up. Sometimes it can sound a little bit robot-like.
Some of
Yeah.
sounds really good.
Some of it sounds, when it's set up properly.
So that's possibly law enforcement officers wanting really good audio because good communications are life and death matter. So expensive radios, not to bandwidth is good.
Most of the US police are using Motorola gear and P25. Phase 2 P25, not phase 1. That's getting back into like the tier level with DMR. Yeah, there's different. P25 uses different phases.
So with the talk groups.
Yep.
So when you've got two repeaters that are on this, that are so say 3807 for instance, which is the Tassie talk group, and I know I hear guys from up north and I hear guys from down here on Clayton's repeater on it. We've just turned on a repeater here. I don't know whether that's on the Mark system or not.
Not yet.
Not yet. But if it is, if it has 3807 as well, obviously on a different frequency, it'll just somehow magically go into that room, and anyone that's on Clayton's repeater will also come out on this one?
Correct. The other thing too, just what you've mentioned there too, just prompted me. In the case of the Mark system, they have set talk groups for set use. So it used to be 505, 3800, and then more recently 4800. They're all linked together now, but they never used to be. So if you're on if you've programmed your radio with talk group 3800, that'll still appear to the other person who might have had a program with 505, because they're in the background, they've linked all those talk groups together.
Yeah. Scott, question from the internet.
Oh my God.
From Greg VK7GX.
Oh yeah.
He says, he knows it's against the LCD, but is it theoretically possible to encrypt the transmissions like EDAX and ProVoice?
Yes, encryption is provided within, with the exception of D-Star and Fusion in these radios I've got here. Encryption is supported by those and by these, because these Radio Oddity ones are actually a commercial sellable radio. You wouldn't buy them for that purpose, but that's what they originally were supposedly targeting it for. You look at their website and they have a nice picture of a policeman using one of their radios. So yes, the Radio Oddity and the TYT do support encryption, and in this case with the NXDN and P25, that too, hardware dependent within the radio, but that too supports encryption at different levels too.
So is encryption built into our GD77?
No, encryption on amateur services is not legal.
Okay.
It's not legal in the US. I don't think it's actually specified here in Australia that it's illegal, but why would you want to? To the human ear, listening to a DMR signal, you can't understand what the person's saying anyway. It's just a data burst. Has anyone here not heard what that sounds like? What DMR sounds like? Let's see if I can actually rig something up here. problem. You get too many radios,
Who's this on page 1?
you lose what the heck you're doing. That is D-star. That's too loud too, it's distorted. But that was D-star. That's what DMR sounds like. They're very similar sounding. If I was to key up on D-star.
Gaps in the other channel not being used.
The other thing too with these modes, they're actually UDP for anyone that's in the networking world. So find Clayton's.
Thankfully.
No acknowledgement.
Yeah, so
Just
the data stream is sent, and if you get it, you get it. If you don't, too bad.
The U stands for Unreliable Data Ram Protocol.
Pretty sure it's user, but
Yeah.
just so.
Good call.
Unreliable.
Can't
Support team.
drive my own radios now. This is not good.
No sense of humour.
No, you don't want that. I'll do that. That's what I want to do. Oh, come on. I'm doing that. I can see my error. That's not the C4FM mode. So. That's D-star. Can I do... Ooh, that might be a bit tricky.
It might also be worth mentioning like that pulsing sound is...
Time division multi-access.
Yeah, exactly. So with Clayton's repeater on DMR, you can have two different conversations on the...
That's what I was... that's what I was thinking about earlier when we got sidetracked. Yeah.
Yeah.
Due to the way DMR is using TDMA, it's essentially got two data streams. So you can have simultaneously two conversations going on the one frequency, and it's all done by TDMA. So, and that is then divided again using the terms within DMR as a time slot. For DMR, phase 1 and phase 2, to a degree, uses only 2 time slots, so 1 and 2. So you could have a person on time slot 1 on a given talk group chatting away. You can have person B on time slot 2 on the very same repeater repeater chatting away on time slot 2. Now the two time slots don't interact, they're completely independent, and there you have two conversations happening on the one frequency that you can't do with standard FM. That was the whole purpose of DMR.
And that's why they just recently introduced 3809, which allows you to talk Australia-wide on
the
time
mark
slot
system,
1
yeah.
and still
Yeah.
leave the repeater free for normal use on
That is the
505.
that's the big conflict with the mark system is it's got the Australian call on 505 on time slot 2. All the state-based groups are on time slot 2, which means that if somebody's using 505 or the state-based,
Locks everything else
it
out.
locks up, when it comes to state-based, it locks up the network for that given area that it's in. If we were VK7,
That happened the other night.
Yeah.
Had a SCAD on 3807 and couldn't use it because 505 was busy.
correct, yeah. That's why Clayton is going to, I think he's eventually going to move across to using, he does the broadcast on 3807. So that essentially ties up 3807 on his repeater and the one in Launceston for the state.
And 505.
It does for local use for 505 here.
So those repeaters you can't use on 505.
Whatever repeaters are active, so in this case it'd be,
Yep.
I think it's RAA and RCR,
RJG.
RJG. Those two repeaters, while they're keyed up on time slot 2, regardless of the talk group, that time slot is busy, so you try to key up on your radio, it's just not going to work. Your GD77s do not handle that particular bit where if the time slot's busy, it actually doesn't do it correctly, where it's supposed to give you a tone that it's errored and that you do not have that access, you've got to wait. Whereas they will actually go into transmit, so they're a bit naughty at this stage, whereas the MD380 does deal with it correctly. You try and key up on the MD380, you'll notice that it pulses about 3 times, and then it'll either give you it's 2 kinds of tones. It'll give you a high tone for a yeah, it's all good to talk, and a low tone, longer tone, like a long beat, saying no, no good, try again.
Thank you for that, Scott. I
Yeah.
wondered what the difference was.
In the tones, yeah, no, that's it. Yeah, so this is where you come down with your Chinese radios. You've got the trade-off of price, but then not necessarily. Let's turn all these off. Yeah, so price and semi-functionality. Like I've got 3 GD77s here. One is without a screen. So you think, well, how are you supposed to know what you're doing? Well, it's purely channelized, so you're using the channel button on the top, but this one
Power on.
talks to you.
16.
So that 16 is telling me that I'm on channel 16 of the top rotary dial. If I change it,
14. 16.
now the take-up of those ones hasn't been very good because, for obvious reasons, you like to see what you're doing. But yeah, so that's that one. Functions exactly the same as its bigger brother, except you can't do dual monitoring on this because you've got no idea what you'd be doing if it was. Hence why it's strictly stuck to the 16 channel position switch at the top. That brings me to another point. When programming a DMR radio, you have, again, this is specific to a particular manufacturer, but because we're more centric on the GD77s, I'll kind of stick with that territory. You have a channel, which is where you put your frequency information. You then have, within that, it also requires a contact and a receive group. And this is where the GD7 doubles up. If you want to talk on the GD77, you need to create a contact. Let's say we make a contact called 505. But to receive that contact, we've got to make a receive group called, you guessed it, 505. And then when we set the channel up, there's 2 drop-down boxes within the program that says you want to use that contact and that receive group. If you don't follow that simple rule, you'll never receive anything on a GD77. They don't, it's just the way they've done it. With the MD380, you create the contact, that's all you need to do. You only create a receive group with the MD380 if you wanted to monitor multiple channels on the one kind of thing, which is not really the way to do it. You're better off doing it single channels. In fact, actually, on the Mark system, these 77s have a bit of a habit of, if you've got them in promiscuous mode, which means it'll receive any talk group that's active on the given frequency you're listening on. They have a bit of a bad habit that they won't necessarily talk back on the one that they just received. They can kind of wander. So don't use the GD77 in promiscuous mode while you're transmitting. Disable the promiscuous mode.
And how do you get into promiscuous mode? I've heard the term used, I've got no idea how you do it.
It depends how the radio's been programmed. I've got mine set so that the blue button on the side, I long press it, and that turns on. It just puts a little speaker icon. Let me.
I'm pretty sure Clayton's
Monitor.
code plug
This
has
is a
that too.
monitor.
The Clayton's code plug uses
Yeah.
the blue button as well.
They call it. That's right. It is called monitor.
If you hit the blue button, it says
Well,
it's scanning or something, doesn't it?
It depends how the side buttons have been configured. You can set the side buttons up to do whatever you want. There's multiple functions. So mine's the black button. Long press that and it turns what's called monitor on, and it gives you a little speaker in the top bar. And now that means that even though the way I've programmed this radio, it is only on 505, it will now receive whatever talk group on that time slot becomes active. You know, if there happened to be, I don't know, 2129 came up active. I don't even know if that's a valid talk group, but I would then receive that, providing it was being transmitted on the same frequency that I'm listening. You're not going to hear any police. You're not going to hear any emergency services. To my knowledge, police do not use DMR at all. We all know Victoria Police use P25, and that they're trying to get rid of it. And the Tas Police still use the EDAX, 20-plus-year-old system. You see, they would really benefit going over to a digital system, because the amount of channels that they currently occupy with that EDAX, they could dramatically increase their frequency use. But that's a...
Can you do promiscuous in the MD380?
Yes, you can. With the 380, you can, there's two firmwares. There's the stock firmware that the manufacturer provides, and then there's a couple of third-party ones that people have made, which opens up a bit of functionality that the stock firmware keeps closed behind doors. One of them is promiscuous mode, and again, it just puts a little symbol on the top little bar indicating that it's on. I actually had trouble with mine the other day. I updated the firmware, but then it kept going in a boot loop, and I couldn't for the life of me work out what was going on. So I reflashed the manufacturer's firmware, and the display inverted. So where it says welcome when you turn it on, the welcome was upside down and flipped. And I'd heard people had this problem, and I thought, crikey, it's finally happened to me. And it turns out to be an incompatibility between a firmware version and the display. They changed the displays, which the logic had to be flipped or some kind of rubbish like that. Anyway, long story short, I managed to get a firmware back on the thing, and it's now working again.
It's actually tricky. I had to replace the screen in one and had the same issue, and they had to go to some obscure website and download it, ask them for the tool to invert the display.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like a Northern Hemisphere version or
No,
something?
no. It's funny you should say that, because on the forum that I was reading, it was an Australian talking to an American, and the American basically, that's what he said, oh, you're in Australia, it's upside down, that's right.
Do you have a ballpark price for these radios?
Rightio. At the moment, the Radio Oddity GD77s, if you purchase them from their website, they will set you back around about $100 Australian, give or take. The MD380s go for a little bit more, and they're usually more readily available on eBay or AliExpress. They usually go for anywhere between 120 to 150. Depends what band too. There's VHF and UHF, because they're a mono-band radio. With the exception of the new MD380 UV380 or whatever it's called. It's a dual band MD380. Haven't got one of those yet. What? I haven't got one yet.
Keyword is yeah.
Yeah. No, I don't think I've got enough. I don't think I need one. Whereas the C4FM radio, this one was released last year. It's an FT70. That was 250 new, but they've gone up a bit since then. D-Star, hold on to your checkbook, because this one here, believe it or not, I got it at a really good price. I got mine for 600, but they're normally 800. Just for that. The difference between this radio and the ID 5100 is only the size of the radio and the output power. The internals are identical. That's why they kind of sell them as a brother-sister system. That's Icon. It's a good radio though. It's well built.
So it should be.
Yeah, exactly. If I didn't receive an amount of money, I would not have that radio. That's the realistic of that. I only bought it because I was given an amount of money. This particular Icon is an ex-commercial one. I bought this one second hand for, it was 200 or thereabouts. Depends where I got it from a guy from Queensland, but this particular model is a UHF model. That's the trap too, is most of the commercial gear is not centred on the amateur bands. It's usually 450 and above. This particular one's 403 to 470, so it's good for the amateur band. This one's an ID 4161, so it's an American version of this strand of radio. What designates that is it was either a 4060, 4161, 4262 and a 4363, and one was European, one was like worldwide, one was American, and don't know, that's an American one. Doesn't have the encryption board in it though, doesn't matter. The P25 radio, most people are probably familiar with the Motorola XTS series. This particular one was given to me, which was very generous, but it was in a very sad state. Didn't have the knobs, didn't have battery, didn't have an antenna, didn't have lots of things, but anyway, it's now working, thanks to eBay. This particular one is 450 to 502 or whatever it is, but you can convince it to go down lower. The actual programming software for it will allow you to go as far as 445, but it comes up with a warning saying, you know, oi, you're actually in the amateur band, and you know, the efficiency of the radio is not going to be as per spec of what they quote, but it can be convinced. I've yet to do the full convince of putting it fully into the 70 centimetre band, so at the moment that one's 440 to 450. That's what I've set it up for.
And all the repeaters here are 2 metres.
Right, repeaters. Now, at the moment, there are 3 digital repeaters in the south. 2 are at Clayton's place, one is on 2 metres, and that is a multi-mode, so it's D-Star, C4FM, DMR, and I think he's also got NXDN and P25 enabled, but realistically, not many people are going to go down those modes, because P25...
That one mode at a time?
Yes, yeah. And depending on the mode, it's either one person or it can be 2. Like DMR, there can be 2 people chatting, but if it's any of the other modes, it's only one person. That'll be the same for the one here once that's DVM enabled. Then he's got the Mark repeater, which is on UHF, 438.525, and the other one is on...
It's quite a bit of use.
Okay.
That one gets quite a bit of use.
Yes, the Mark one is quite busy. I think it's only because you guys don't know about the other one yet. Let's try something on the right thing. 146.9625 is the 2 metre one, and that has a 1.6 meg offset. So, and it's not.
It's programmed into the GD77s.
Yes, it is
on his code flag. So.
Yeah. So that's that, and that one's, as I said, that one's multi-mode, so that covers all the modes that he's got switched on. Now the newer one, which will be on, well, it is on UHF, is RAD. That's on 438.675 with a 7 meg offset. Who's stuffed up the 70 centimetre band?
I was just going to say, if, after the presentation, if you want to take a look at it,
yeah, I want to take a look at it too.
Yeah.
Kind of gets back to the 2 networks again and how they're used. I mentioned that Brandmeister is a little bit more open and free to do what you want, providing you're not harming anybody or interfering with them. Whereas the Mark system is more closed, and they do it that way so they actually keep control of it, really, so that it doesn't become just a higgledy-piggledy mess. Like, some people say Brandmeister's a mess and it's this, that and the other. It's what you make of it. And you know, you don't have to use Brandmeister, you don't have to use Mark. You'll have to use one of them though, but you know, what one you choose is entirely up to you. I've actually got a YSF reflector. YSF is C4FM. I've actually got a Fusion reflector set up, which is linked into Brandmeister's talk group of 5057. That in turn is linked into, I also have an XLX reflector. Now XLX is a D-Star to DMR system, but because I've got that common link of the Brandmeister channel, my XLX reflector listens on Brandmeister 5057, so those 2 reflectors are essentially linked through the use of Brandmeister. So I'm mentioning XLX and that's going to go what, but that's where hotspots kind of cover that side of thing. So the repeaters, depending on the owner, especially if they're multi-mode, you may not necessarily have control of what's available to use, like what service it uses, what talk groups it uses. It really depends on the individual. Clayton's 2 metre one, the multi-mode one, is open slather. He doesn't have any limits. So the only limit is that he prefers if you use 505 on time slot 1. That's the only, and 5057 on time slot 2. That's the only thing he kind of wants people to use, and I think that's how he's programmed his radios as well, so you don't have to worry about that side of what time slot you're on, but that's more or less how he wants it. Again, like with the Mark system, we don't have any control over how that is set up, where you use what they have or you don't.
Yeah, so just on that, Scott, so say if I wanted to use a private talk group that's not necessarily listed by the repeater, I can't dial it in like I would an IRLP node?
Right, if you're on the Mark system, no you can't. Right, but if you're on Brandmeister, provided the number that you've come up with in your head is within the range, and I forget what the range is, of DMR talk groups, there is a limit, but I forget what the number is. It's quite a big number. Like you could come up with, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, highly original. And if no country or no individuals using that, you're free to use it.
Okay.
But again, on the Mark system, you can't just punch in any old talk group and go, yeah, run away, because it's not going to work.
Because certainly one of my interests is with the Brandmeister network. They've got talk groups set up for like AMSAT and for all these sort of private.
We see it's going back onto the Mark system is reflector based. There is reflectors for certain interest groups. Off the top of my head, I have no idea what they are.
Sure.
But they are available. I was going to do a practical demonstration, but I'm not really sure that that's actually really...
Question, so what is OpenSpot?
OpenSpot, okay. That's coming into the Hotspot territory. The rundown of Hotspot, I'll try to be brief on this. There is what's called a ZumSpot. Oh, you got one over there, haven't you? Oh, just there, yeah. Yeah, you've got one called a ZumSpot. Then you have the slang version, which is called a chin spot, or jumbo spot, or any other non-semi-offensive word that you could use for the fact that it was manufactured in China and basically a blatant rip-off of somebody else's design.
That doesn't happen.
Of course not. And then you have the product that you mentioned, the Shark RF OpenSpot. They all do the same job, they just all do it slightly differently. The OpenSpot is an embedded system, whereas the ZumSpot is using a Raspberry Pi as its brains. So that's the difference there. I didn't really want to go into hotspots because that's quite a in-depth.
Oh, okay, because I've just that I have OpenSpot in my code plug, obviously I can't use it without an appropriate device.
You need an OpenSpot, and then you've got to set up the OpenSpot on the frequency that it's been set up.
Throw it away and put a ZumSpot in there instead.
No. You can buy whatever you want. That's up to you. Whatever you want to buy.
When that comes around, put it in your pocket.
And the price range is actually, that's an interesting thing with the ZumSpot. When the original supplier was a Canadian guy who got out of it.
That one.
Yeah, same with mine. I got 2 of them. He got in over his head, really.
Yeah, real quick.
Basically, the supply and demand of that particular device exploded, and he had not the means to actually provide the amount that people were ordering. And so it got handed over to HRO to deal with the logistics of the supply of them. So they are available. You can only buy them through HRO though, which is ham radio outlet in the States. You might have third parties that have purchased them and then trying to make a buck or 3 on them by selling them on. And the China one, which I mentioned, is pretty much identical to what's going around the room there. The only difference is it has an onboard chip antenna for 433, which is the first thing you take off it when you get it, if you do get one, because you want to use an external antenna. You'll notice the little antenna that's been provided with that zoom spot even. You want to throw that away. Okay, they are okay, but you'll only get about probably 500 metres range out of it.
Around the house, which is what I use it for.
Which is probably, that's the thing. It's designed for, you know, you're using your radio on low power and within the immediate area.
So does that hook into your, what do you have to do to make that hook into the Mark system or into the Grandmaster system?
That's what I didn't really want to cover.
Come and have a chat.
Well, briefly,
I retract the question.
No, there's on that particular device, there's a custom image being made of Raspbian, and it has what's called MMDVM host, and MMDVM host, as the name implies, handles the talking between the relevant systems through the Raspberry Pi. So the board on top does the demodulation of the mode, and then it gets handed onto the Raspberry Pi, which then in turn pipes it to the correct, you know, wherever it's got to go.
So I know you don't want to talk about
yeah, I know.
but in terms of the functionality,
of a hotspot,
why would you have a hotspot?
Right, that's the million-dollar question. Right, where I am in Kingston, I cannot access Clayton's repeaters with a handheld. Hence, I've got a lot of handhelds. If I was to have a mobile rig, yes, I would. But because I've got handhelds, I can't access his repeaters. But I want to use the system. So what I do is I've got 7 hotspots, and
of course you do.
One in each corner of the house.
pretty much.
You mean 7 at home or 7 along the way?
But do they talk to a bigger radio in your house, do they?
No, they're all individual hotspots. They're all different frequencies.
Oh, they cost the internet.
They connect to different services on the internet.
Now I'm with it.
For example, I have
Hotspots Anonymous.
See, I started off with just a
still think about RF.
Hotspot is RFs to the radio. That's the RF part of it.
Yeah.
But then the hotspot is just part of the DMR network in the sense that it's on the internet.
It's your own private repeater, really.
Yeah, hotspot.com.
A good example is what Ken does.
Yeah, he's interstate at the moment.
But his hotspot is into his phone, so the network's supplied by the phone, and he's got a rig in his car.
He's using a open shark, RF shark that Steve mentioned. I actually had to help Ken a week ago trying to remote.
So you're using the hotspots for the last, if you like, 10 metres or whatever, from the internet, which is going back to Clayton's. So you're using them purely to give you connectivity at home onto your radios. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. It's basically a hotspot is a bridge from RF to internet.
Not going to Clayton.
But you don't need Clayton in the mix.
But if you want to talk to Clayton, or anywhere else. Yeah. It just gives you web access.
Correct.
Okay, so there's 2 servers in Australia. One is at what's called a DMR Plus. That's the Mark network. That handles all the Mark traffic, and then you've got one for Grandmaster. Again, that handles all the Grandmaster traffic. And when you've got a hotspot, you'll connect. You can set up the hotspot in several ways, but essentially to connect to either of those systems or both of them, and then you can utilise your radio through those systems.
So who runs these servers?
In the case, well, it's amateurs. You know, I've got, as I said, I've got a couple of reflectors sitting at home. There's just 2 Raspberry Pis just kind of hanging out on the bench. There's no radios connected to them.
Right.
And it's just literally software on a Raspberry Pi that if somebody chooses to connect to that system, they can come out onto RF, but yeah, that's...
The operation's a little bit different. You've actually got to use a reflector. So if you want to connect to 3807, which is the statewide Tassie talk group, you have to send a private call to 4807, and that links your hotspot up with that particular talk group, and then you...
This is why I didn't want to cover hotspots. Because it's a can of worms really quickly.
So it's a centralised system, not a distributed system.
It's, well, I call it more decentralised because you...
it all runs off one server though, the Mark system.
Yeah, the Mark system certainly is a centralised system, yeah. Brandmaster, and I suppose Brandmaster is too, it's just several servers throughout several countries.
If you want to get really confused about hotspots, just listen on DMR, because about 90% of conversations are how do I do this?
And the other 10% about code play.
Yeah, that's right.
So Scott,
if you have a wrong talk groups.
if you have a hotspot at home, does each one need to have its own unique ID?
Right, that comes back to why I have 3 IDs and I didn't need 3 IDs. With DMR, you get allocated a 7-digit number. It'll always start with 5057 because we're in Tasmania. That's Tassie's first 4 digits indicates Tasmania. Now I got 5057057 was my first number, and I thought, beauty, hotspot number 1. We've got that number to be identified on the Brandmeister network. Then I got a second hotspot, and I thought, I want that on the mark system, but I want it to be separate. So I went and got a second ID. And then I got a third one. And I got an email back from them saying, 3 is your limit, you're not getting any more. And then I found out that with a hotspot, it doesn't care what number is in it. But you use what you're allocated, but then you can append, you can make it a 9-digit number and say put 00, 01, just keep adding that way. And that's how a lot of people who have, it's basically, it's like assigning an SSID to it, but you're just adding 2 more digits. And you see, my mistake was, I only needed 1 DMR ID, but I have 3, but really I only needed 1. Because with all the hotspots I have, I could have just done it that way. And that comes back to, when you're using a hotspot through Brandmeister, there's a section of where your reflectors, your hotspots are listed, and you can set them up so that you can either have a static talk group, so if there's any traffic on that talk group, it'll come through your hotspot. Or you can have dynamic, where if you want to use a particular talk group, you key it up, let it release, and then go talking on it. It'll sit on that for a period of time, and then it'll drop off. That's the static and dynamic. That's the 2 main things you'll hear with talk groups. So long story short, you only need 1 DMR ID. You don't need multiple.
Scott, one very basic question I haven't got my mind around. The communication from you to the hotspot, is that done from the radio at RF frequency, or can you do it from your phone through Bluetooth or something?
There are some devices where you can use Bluetooth, but I'm not up to speed with those. But what I'm doing is strictly RF to the hotspot.
Just RF, so there's an RF receiver in there.
Yeah, the hotspot has the infamous ADF 7021 chip, which is a broadband receiver from, depending on what, if you put an inductor on L1, L2 pots on the thing, it'll cover basically DC to daylight. However, it's more efficient at the 433, 915 bands. That's where it's primarily tuned internally.
Scott, question from VK6PCB.
Oh my god.
Yep. With the DMR IDs, would you use them when you're adding those extra 001s? Do you just append that number to the end, or do you have like 5056-059-001?
You don't have a dash, you would just simply include 2 more digits. So it'd be there is 5056XXX, and then 00 or 01, or whatever number combination he wants to come up with for those last 2 digits, as long as they're different.
Okay.
That's the main thing. So that's...
Hotspot's a simplex then?
Yes. Yeah.
And the hotspot, you said it's got the wideband receiver. Obviously, it's got a transmitter in it as well.
Yes, it is. It's a transmitter receiver in a chip,
So,
basically.
So how do you set the transmit frequency on it? Can you choose your own frequency? Or?
In the case of the one that's going around the room, it uses a custom firmware called PyStar, and you'll hear this term kicking around a fair bit. PyStar is the predominant used Raspberry Pi image used for hotspots. There are others available, but that's basically the majority of what people use.
And you use software to define the frequency you want.
Yeah, you got an entry box where you have what frequency you want to be on.
Just open up a web browser, don't you?
Yeah, PyStar is actually advanced considerably in the 12 odd months that I've been playing with this stuff. It used to be you have to manually set up the Wi-Fi if you were using it on Wi-Fi. You had to manually do quite a few other bits and pieces, whereas now the guy that is making this stuff, it's now set up so when you plug the SD card into the Raspberry Pi, plug it in for the first time, it'll fire up its own access point so you can use your phone to connect to the Raspberry Pi and then go through all the configuration over your phone into the web. That is like a web browser interface. So you do all that through, well, it doesn't have to be your phone, it can be a PC. So that's it's much more simplified than what it was.
Just another ballpark sort of a question. If you were using a hotspot through your phone to get onto the internet, so that you could be anywhere in Australia where you're in phone range, I take it you then have DMR, regardless whether there's repeaters there or not. And obviously there are a lot of places in Australia where there aren't any DMR repeaters. So that sounds like the way to go. but how much data does it use? You're likely to top your plan in one conversation?
No. The throughput data of DMR is only something like
9600 baud.
Yeah.
9.6 kilobits per second.
Yeah, maximum. Well, you're not even getting that full throughput through DMR because that'd be two channels running.
Yeah, 48.
So you're really looking at only 4800 boards, so 4.8K maximum.
Sort of dial-up sort of stuff.
Yeah, we're talking dial-up speeds.
Yeah, so you could talk for hours and hours and hours without topping out your data plan.
Pretty much, I've not managed to go over my data allocation yet. I'm close.
You'd need to be talking for several hours to use a gigabyte a day.
Well, not only that, if you were using it on a repeater site, for example, you could use Pi-Star with like a 3 or 4G dongle plugged into it, and it could be sitting on a hill somewhere, using that to access the internet if there wasn't any internet access there. So DMR can be used in simplex without using a network to talk through, like. And the nominated frequency for Australia is 439.200.
Which is programmed into the GD77.
And I can't remember what top group Clayton's used, but it's usually 99.
505 simplex.
Is it? It's not used 99, so this is the thing.
It has an issue because when you try and use it on 505 simplex and somebody talks on 505 on the repeater, you can't talk on 505 simplex.
Oh.
In that case then, what you want to do is fire up your code plug, change the channel from the simplex one channel, change the contact and the receive group to 99, because 99 is the American one that's used. That's obviously everyone follows the US. So 99's not officially been adopted here. That's what people do use.
No, I haven't tried doing it.
Yeah, we have. I spoke to you when I was going through Taruna once.
Did you? On simplex? Did we do that?
439 too.
Was that yesterday? I wouldn't remember.
No, this was a few weeks ago. I was a really picking up Claire.
Yeah, I forgot we'd done it on simplex. Yeah, you're right.
I got I think it was about Taruna High School when you lost me.
So is there only one simplex channel, or can you program in like?
You can have whatever you want.
Yeah.
But it comes back to the band plan, whether or not you want to respect the band plan.
The other person would have to have that program.
If you want to use a simplex to like me to you on a given frequency and a given talk group, that's the main things that have to match. Is the frequency and the talk group have to match. People try to say that the time slots are irrelevant when it's point to point, but you can use either because it actually uses both. Some say that it doesn't, but I've tried it. I can do. I'll probably have to do that now, actually. I think I've got the code plug here that's got it in. See what I'm doing. So let's put that into that.
Probably other people in the room know this. What's the minimum licensing you need? Is a standard acceptable, or do you need a
standard license you need for using DMR, but watch this space because it may change. It's in the proposals that have been kicking around for the last millennia. Justin's the guy, he's the head honcho for that.
Keeping his mouth shut.
No comment.
Right, yeah, so that
it's with the ACMI.
So these two radios are both on 439.200. They are set up with time slot 1, but as I say, I think I've got one with time. No, I've reprogrammed these since. No, I don't. Yeah, if I had one with time slot 1, time slot 2, so you key up and you turn the volume up. Hello. You VK7 HSE. Right, and then back the other way. VK7 HSE. Right, there you go.
So I'm on 505 simplex here and I'm not hearing it. So.
You wouldn't have heard it unless you put it into promiscuous mode. That's the only way you'll hear me.
So why is that? Because you were on time slot 1, really?
No, it's not the time slot. It's the talk group.
Okay.
Talk groups. Now, that's the one thing we didn't cover.
The light came on, but I didn't.
Yeah, lights on, nobody's home.
Yes, please tell us why the lights
that's
on.
really normal with me.
Now, DMR
on behalf of nearly everybody.
I wonder if it's 10 or 15. There's 10 or 15 colour codes. Now, colour codes in the DMR world is like CT, CSS in the FM analog world.
Oh, I know what they were.
Yeah,
So-
that's all. It's just
So say that again, the colour code's what?
Right, there's a terminology in DMR called colour code.
Yeah, I've heard the terminology, I have no idea what it meant.
What it is, it's like CT, CSS, but for DMR.
Okay.
It's basically, it's a unique, you know, if you're all on colour code 1, you'll all hear each other, and if you're all on the same talk group, you'll all hear each other. If you had the same frequency, but one on colour code 1, one on colour code 2, they won't talk to each other.
Of course not.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just like a busy lockout on a multi-use.
That's what you get. If the thing's been programmed correctly, yeah, you wouldn't PTT it. You could press the button until your cows come home and you just won't get anywhere. Is there anything else, guy? I think I've pretty much
A lot of the discussion's been about voice over digital. Can you do digital over digital, or data, like APRS for instance, or other non-voice communications?
You can do
text messages.
You can do text messaging.
But that's only on brand most of them.
No, you can do it simplex. Let's just see if I can
do it on Mark.
Huh?
Funny you say that because there's conflicting information there. Because
I've sent messages to Clayton.
So have I. And you're not supposed to be able to do it. They supposedly have it blocked, but
well, maybe that was because we were both on the same repeater.
That's possible.
Maybe it doesn't go repeater to repeater.
That's probably it. Yeah.
While we're both on the RF side of the network, it worked.
Yes. It'd be way easier just to say delay, wasn't it, rather than
well,
type it in.
It just gave me a reminder of how we used to send text messages, and I thought, I don't know how we actually did that.
Like what I'm trying to do right now.
Yeah.
Just some more information from Carlston VK6 PCB.
Yeah.
He just said that he's running one of his hotspots on a phone data connection, and in the last 3 to 4 months of using it, he's only used about 500 megabytes.
There you go.
Okay.
So 3 out of sod all.
Yeah.
Right, I just sent a very basic message from radio A to radio B, and you probably just heard that tone, I don't know. Okay, I didn't give me the option to reply. Ooh, what's the radio number on that one? I'll forget that.
Meanwhile,
yeah, because I've got 3 numbers, I can't remember what's in that radio.
So can one just buy a hotspot and plug it into your phone and it'll go, or does it require 3 months of university study to get
it does require a few minutes to set it up, and that few minutes of setup, depending on, how do I say this politically correct, depending on your level of competency of using a PC and the ability to read, will vary on how long it actually takes you to set it up. It is fairly straightforward, but that's for me.
Because I was thinking, if we go off tripping, like for instance, we're going to, to Europe next year, so it might be really handy to have something like that. Although, come to think of it, that's probably not going to work because it'll be on roaming data, and that could cost a fortune.
Get a data center. The other option is find out where you're actually going.
Go on Wi-Fi.
The city. No, and see if there's actually a DMR repeater in the local
Well,
area. All you then have to do is program up the radio with your relevant frequency. And you're halfway there.
Other options would be to get an international SIM or a semi-destination country, and if you're connected to your phone using Wi-Fi and the Wi-Fi configuration doesn't change, it should also work.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So that way you've got your data from overseas working, plus voice calls as well for those people who don't have an amateur license, if you want to talk to such people.
The other option is to just not bother, because when you call locally here, nobody will talk to you anyway, so you might why bother. Well, but they don't talk to me anyway.
So which is the best hotspot to go with? What does that cost?
Well, again, that really comes to personal preference and budget. At the moment, if I was just to take a snapshot of what's available, the ones from China are the cheapest ones, but you get what you pay for. Some of them have been notorious for bad TXCO crystals, and they actually have to replace that before they'll work. And the build quality of them is a bit questionable. The two that I have are fine, there's nothing wrong with them, but that might be just because I got a good batch of, because it was early on in the piece when they first were out. They were only $30 a piece back then. You'll find the average sale price of a Chinese one now is anything between $50 to $150, and that depends whether or not they're providing a Raspberry Pi with it, which of course won't be an official Raspberry Pi. Don't go there. Then the Hotspot would probably come in next. When I bought mine, that was 105 Canadian. I think they've still kept that price US, haven't they? 105 US or thereabouts. But then you've got your freight getting it to Australia, which is probably going to be about the same.
GST. Little thing that
we ordered two, so we got the shipping. We shared the shipping. That was cool.
Was that pre or post GST?
Pre.
Yeah, so then there's going to be GST on top of that.
Yeah.
For internet sales.
Not much you can do about that, unfortunately.
No.
No, I'm not going to say it. Refrain. And then the most expensive is the RF Shark OpenSpot. Bear in mind that the version 1 of that, well I think they're calling it version 1, is no longer for sale from them. And they still haven't put a release date on their version 2.
On that, checking their website, they say autumn 2018, so it could mean any time.
Yeah, probably the end of October, I'm going to guess.
Yeah.
Brings it into the beginning of the fourth quarter, so to speak. I have version 1 OpenSpot, RF Shark OpenSpot, and I primarily use mine on D-Star. Just because conveniently that's what it got set up for 6 months ago, and it's just sat on that ever since. But I have like what went around the room for the others. It's a couple of spots and China spots.
Did you get them back?
I can see it.
Whose pocket's it in?
The one that's the brightest in the room. Yes, and there is also one of the original German guys out of obviously Germany, Flo, forget his call sign, but he also hand makes and sells hotspots as well. And these are the ones that the Chinese ones are based off. The Hotspot are just a little bit different from his, but if you read the mail, there's been a little bit of toing and froing saying and accusations of plagiarism, but when it's under GPL, how does plagiarism exist?
And when you've got people whose design is basically copying the manufacturer's application,
Exactly. In this case, they're both using the same RF chip, which has a specific way that you have to interface with it. And you can't deviate left or right of that, so that's why they're pretty much identical. Well, that's another whole topic for another day. Anyway, does anybody else have any other questions that I can hopefully answer?
I haven't really tried doing it, but how hard is it to actually talk to people overseas on it? I haven't really bothered with it, but what do you actually have to do that?
Right, on the Mark system, it requires the use of the reflectors, which at the moment I believe are not active in Australia, which is a bone of contention. So Australia's DMR Mark is essentially Australia only at the moment.
So we can't.
It wasn't to start with.
It wasn't to start with, no.
I can remember listening to it.
Yes, yeah, there was.
Well,
they stopped it, have they?
2 days after I got mine, I spoke to a bloke in New Zealand, but I can't remember how the hell I did it.
He might have come on to one of the talk groups.
No, I did it. I had to go in and then do a use a defined call group or something like that.
Yep. Were you on UHF or 2 metres?
On Clayton's 77 thing.
Oh, okay. To my knowledge, the reflector side of Mark in Australia is currently off and has been for some time.
Okay.
However, doing it on Brandmeister is very easy. All you need to find out is the relevant talk group number to where you want to go.
And we go on Brandmeister with these by going into his 2 metre one, is that right?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Which is on 146.9.
Yeah, well, it's broken
right,
into
yeah. Now, to get a list of talk groups, Brandmeister website, down the left-hand side of the page under, I don't know if it's tools or something, there's a listing down the side that you can click on and you can search for talk groups. Now, the search is a bit backwards because you've basically got to know what you're looking for before you can search for it.
Oh.
However, if you put in a range, it'll bring back, you know, it basically, you know, to search the system, you've got to put a numerical sequence in.
Clayton gave me a great long list of 4,000 series numbers for various countries and stuff. Is that Brandmeister or?
Well, it's both. Both networks use the 4,000 range for their reflectors, but the reflectors don't necessarily match up between the two networks. So again, you can't talk from DMR Mark to Brandmeister or Brandmeister to DMR Mark. They're not linked. They don't talk to each other.
So they would have been DMR Mark.
They would have been DMR Mark reflectors.
Which now don't work.
No, at the moment don't work.
That's why I've been having trouble making it work.
If you go onto the 2 metre one, and providing you know, if you use reflector 4400, that'll get you into the UK. This is just off the top of my head. What else is there? If you wanted to go to New Zealand, you could use talk group 530. But again, some of these talk groups may not be already programmed in. You'd have to set them up into your radio. And
well, I did the New Zealand one. I dialed it in. You push button A and push button B, and then you type in the number or something like that.
The thing with the GD77, when you actually do type in a number from the keypad, it defaults as a private call, not a group call. And I haven't found a way that you actually can tell it to go as a group call. Whereas the MD380 with the hacked firmware is the opposite. You can specify from the keypad whether it's a private or a group call. And the difference between the private call is it's simply, you know, one-to-one, or it's for controlling your reflectors. If you use a private call to control reflectors, everybody else on the whole network doesn't hear you keying up that reflector, basically. That's why, yeah.
Yeah, you keep finished.
That's why all reflector control is done as a private call. Otherwise, if you had to put in 4800, anyone who happens to have a 4800 listening would just hear the ka-chunk. But as a private call, that does not happen. And the amount of ka-chunks you hear of 4800 or, you know, the relevant state numbers on the mark system is horrendous.
But one thing I do like about it is that the button pressures
are identified.
Yeah. You can't get away with it.
Just because, well, providing they've actually legitimately programmed their ID into their radio correctly.
There's a VK2 that you just see 505 come up in sort of 1 second bursts all day sometimes.
Well, that's the other thing too. On the Brandmeister system, if you get your radio and go key, if it senses that you're keying too many times within a set time period, you get banned for about an hour. And it's happened to me once.
That's on Brandmeister.
That's on Brandmeister. It does have like they call it a loopback suppression. So that's the other thing too, going back to the hotspots that we're not talking about. If you had a repeater and you had your hotspot in your car and you just pulled up at your mate's place and he's got the repeater on and you're talking, and somehow you get an audio loop between the two services, they will become an oscillating, never-ending loop. And that is very annoying when that happens.
Yeah. Another question from the internet.
Oh, God.
What is the difference between the Brandmeister and DMR Plus?
What's the difference? Yeah. Okay, Brandmeister was started in Germany and is an open system by means of you can use any talk group within the permitted talk groups, which again I forget what the maximum number is. However, there are preset talk groups for set zones, regions and countries. The DMR Mark system, or DMR Plus, the DMR Mark, DMR Plus are essentially two different things, but they are joined together. So DMR Mark is the RF side of that system. DMR Plus is the hotspot access into that system. So, for example, me at Kingston, I use a hotspot to get into the 3807 or 4807 groups here, so I can come out on Clayton's repeater. So that's how that works. And again, the same restrictions that are on the Mark system are on DMR Plus. They essentially share the same ethos and the way they're configured, I think. Yeah. Anything else?
With ID codes, if someone's transmitting and comes up on your radio, sometimes I get ID codes, sometimes I get call signs.
Right, what that is, that's purely your radio ID database needs updating. Now
Is that something that's easy to do?
Oh yeah.
Yes, but there's a
what type of radio you got?
MD380.
Oh, very easy. Very, very easy.
It's easy on the GD77 too.
Have you got the radio with you now?
Is it available on the internet how to do that?
Yeah. Look up MD380 tools ending with an S, and down the right hand column on that website there's, if you're using Linux, there's a script, install script, and it basically creates a heap of aliases for your bash login, and you just, once it's installed, type in menu and it'll display an ASCII menu on your screen and follow the prompts.
I'm not in Linux.
But you're not in Linux? Seriously? Under Windows it's a little bit more tricky.
Oh, okay.
But you can use a virtual machine of the Linux thing that I just mentioned.
The GD77 is really easy. You just go to I forget the website, but when you go to it, you can put in.
You specify the radio.
Yeah, and you can just put in. You just run update on VK7s, and it brings down all the VK7s that you haven't already got in your radio, and you go bazonk and it's there.
See,
it's easy.
There is freely available the lists of DMR IDs available from radioid.net. That's now they are now the group that are control the allocation of IDs. Formerly it was the DMR Mark system itself, but they stopped doing it about 3 months ago. And now this other website deals with that. You can actually grab the database manually yourself, and it's just a CSV file, and you can manipulate it however you wish.
Is that what I see in the contacts list in my program in Code Plus?
Essentially it is, yeah. You can, with the MD380, you've got two ways that you can populate the contacts. You've got the 1024 limit of what it has internally, but there's another bank of memory that's not allocated, where that worldwide database can be stored. And that's how I've got mine configured. So regardless, providing, I've updated mine yesterday, so provided there's not been any new registrations around the world, which I'm sure there would have been, you key up on my, an I receiver on my radio, it'll come up with your call sign. But depending on when yours was last updated, mine will probably come up as a number. Depending on your time.
These are things I'm still learning.
Yeah, no, it is very, very easy. I'm going to have a chat with you in a few minutes. Sort you out.
Now I've got an idea. Have a look.
Yeah, it's very easy because the MD380 is it's an STM32 chip inside doing all the USB hosting, so it's very easy to manipulate remotely because it's not locked down by the Chinese. They were very clever there. They decided to leave the radio very hackable. Which is good for us. Unfortunately, the GD77 is not as freely hackable, as in it's not hackable really at all.
So it's a recommendation probably to go for the 380 then?
Well, this is where it comes down to a trade-off. I started with the MD380, and that's a single band, in this case UHF. But then I got a GD77 because it's dual band, which meant I now have DMR capabilities on both 2 metres and 70 centimetres. So if you were to ask me that question on where I was, I would say if I'm at home, I'd probably be using the 380 for the database really, so I can cheat and see who I'm talking to. But if I'm out and about, I'll go with that one because it's got 2 bands in it. And granted, at the moment with the 2 repeaters that Clayton has and what will happen out the back are all in the city. But if I was in the city, at least then I've got the option of 3 devices that I can play with if I had time. Yeah, so it really comes down to what you really want to use it for. I mean, the price difference between them is not really that much. You certainly would, if you were to buy an MD380 in both VHF and UHF, you'd be spending more money than what you would for a GD77. But the MD380 has a better firmware support through this third-party firmware where you can store the whole worldwide database and whatnot, whereas the GD77 has a limit. They do have an allocated memory in that for 10,000 contacts that is not easily, it's not dealt with through code.
So you need to have firmware to put the database in?
For the MD380, yeah. Okay. Yeah. For it to you can upload it, it just won't display because the firmware doesn't know what to do with it. And to my knowledge, it's not an area of memory that the firmware uses anyway within it. But yeah.
Scott, do you know what the dual band 380 is going to be worth?
I have no idea, but there's a couple of other radios in that field. You've also got the Anytone 768 or 678, I forget now. There's 2 other models of dual band handhelds that I've not heard many people saying that they're using them here. Okay. Heard certainly in the States, but not here.
Do you know if MD380 Tools supports the new?
No, not yet. Apparently it's a work in progress. Yeah. But yeah, another guy who I talked with from New South Wales, he's actually got the dual band MD380. He tried putting it on it and didn't like it. The good thing with the MD380 is you can't brick them. It's nearly impossible to brick them. So if you put the wrong firmware on it, you just flash the correct one. Whereas, some things you put the wrong firmware on it and it's good night Irene.
It's breaking.
This thing here, put the wrong firmware. This one here actually has the original P25 firmware that Motorola ever released. That is never getting updated for 2 reasons. The memory chips will probably flake out if it was attempted to be updated. And secondly, it's a living dinosaur. So, because it's the original P25 firmware. Yeah.
If people need more assistance in making a decision, the committee is looking at getting another batch of the GD77s in. So probably the same price point, but the benefit from those is when you get them, they're pre-programmed by Clayton and that they'll work when they're in your hands, as opposed to these ones where it's how do you set up your code plugs or program them and how much hair do you want to spend solving their problem.
It'd be for me, it would have been an absolute nightmare if I had to start from scratch. It's just so easy to pick up the radio, push the button and it works straight away. And then you can learn from there. You can learn from there but you can learn from there by fiddling because you can update the, you can save the code plug and then reinstall it if you stuff up.
I got into all this stuff
from
about
scratch
12 months ago.
I'm with him.
Yeah. I was wondering why you're wearing that t-shirt.
So, I mean, seriously, the work that Clayton did to make sure that when these were, the GD77s were put in people's hands, they would work at that point, I think has been the reason this has been so successful.
Absolutely.
I have seen some other club members who I thought were top gun, scratching heads trying to make these things work. So clearly it's not something where the entry level is low. It's a skilled thing like a commercial radio system. If you know what you're doing, it's great. If you don't, you got to do an awful lot of coffee.
You just look inside the code plug, there's so many nooks and crannies in
radio
it.
Second nature.
Yeah.
If you've not had any dealings with programming commercial radios, then it's a very, very decent.
And also, I think something you need a computer and software to make it work. You can't use a radio on its own. So again, if anyone's got any concerns or they think people are looking at getting into this, keep your eyes out on the broadcast and usual emails, and we'll make sure we know what's going on there, because this has been again a really good piece of work by Clayton, and has really, I think, made this happen here in Hobart.
The one radio that you can do it from the keyboard is the HD1 by Alliance, but they're very expensive. They're like 250 or 270 Australian, just to think about. And they pretty much look like a GD77 in appearance, except they've got like an MB380 screen with its actual TFT screen. But that is one where you can actually do frequency, talk group, and all that through the keypad of the radio. There's
They claim that there's no need to use a code plug software. You can, but they claim that
it would only take about 15 weeks to put in, just PK7.
I was going to say, I'm getting
then you forget to hit save again.
Now I do have a copy of Clayton's current code plug for anyone that happened to bought your radio tonight if you want it updated. But if you don't, that's fine. But I do have it available.
When was the last update?
Well, he's included, he could send it to me in an email, I'm just trying to remember, there's a portable repeater that will be set up for the Moina Handfest, and it'll have information for that repeater in it, which obviously the current ones don't, and also for the one that's out the back here, when that goes to MNDDM, it'll be all set up for that one as well. So
that's his current one? Has he got the local one in the current one?
I think so.
I was talking to him about the other day. I wasn't sure that he'd actually reduced that one yet.
Well, what I got, I haven't looked at the one he emailed me the other night. He just sent it to me and said, oh, by the way, here's the code plug in case anyone wants it on Wednesday night.
Okay.
So I've got a copy of it. I don't look at it.
The new one.
So maybe it's worthwhile driving to Moina on the 17th, is it?
Yeah.
And again, there will be, I think, some digital radios up there possibly. We'll see how this goes. Again, come see the guys, visit the Reast stand. And
Clayton's running one on behalf of, they're doing it on his own, but he's essentially for the Mark system.
Yeah, so opportunities there. Beyond that, I guess get in touch with us and try the usual Wednesday evening, see who turns up. Definitely happening.
Yeah, he's trying to talk me into something, but I'm resistant. So I do have these radios on the table here, just my little collection of the various modes, various brands. Now that we're all looking at me, 4 of them are DMR, the other 4 are P25, NXDN, D-Star and C4FM. You can get various different brands for all of that, well, for the lot, but that's just what I have as my little problem addiction collection. collection. That's the word. All right, on that, I'm done.
All right, thanks, mate.
So thank you very much everybody for making it up here in the cold and in the dark. Like I said, next month's presentation, I'm aiming to have it on port operations, so if those of you are thinking about maybe some things you can share with others, please get in touch with me, emails president@reast.asn.au, or come and see me at one Wednesday night. Thanks again for everybody being here, and coffee, there's a few mini muffins left over, so thanks again.
Can we have a look at the